afternoon, Venerable, distinguished guests, and friends of NUS. It gives me great pleasure to be chairing today's event. We are indeed fortunate to have with us Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi. The Venerable is a founding director of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I had the pleasure of visiting him last year in May in Boston itself. It's a very nice office. A non-partisan collaborative think tank focused on interdisciplinary research and programs related to the development of human and global ethics. As an authority on transformative and enlightened leadership at the MIT, he has been interviewed by the National Public Radio, and articles on him and his work have appeared in the New York Times and the Boston Globe. He also speaks at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and various institutes of learning internationally. The Venerable serves on the board of several philanthropic, humanitarian, and educational organizations. I've heard Venerable speak about 2 years ago in Singapore, and as we met again at MIT earlier last year, I continue to walk away very impressed with his insights, with his clarity of thought, and his very easy to grasp things that are very applicable to our everyday lives. Today, the Venerable will speak on nature or self-interest. Why do leaders become philanthropists? Or, provokingly, do philanthropists become leaders? I have no doubt that this talk will spark off an interesting dialogue, and I ask that you all be as participative as you can in asking as much questions as you can during his time here. Please join me in welcoming Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and delight to be here with you this afternoon to share some thoughts on leadership and philanthropy. Firstly, let me speak briefly on leadership aspect itself. About almost two and a half years ago, as a world, we experienced a slight bump in our day-to-day understanding of economics and finance. The slight bump called financial meltdown. And there were all kinds of analysis that were presented as to what may have caused it or what could have caused it. And when you go beyond the facade of complexities, it basically boiled down to two aspects, two behavioral aspects that may have contributed to such a global event. And those two things were greed and deceit, human greed and human deceit, that multiplied by sophisticated analysis that may have led to this aspect of meltdown. Now, what that prompted was also a conversation in schools of business and schools of management, a heated argument whether leaders can be made or not, meaning that when a school or when an enterprise speaks of leadership education or speaks that of leadership program, is it false advertisement? Can we actually train leaders? Or leaders are simply born, as the popular saying goes. And so I believe in some circle that debate still continues. But I am, of course, a firm believer that leaders are trained, that you can have certain aspects of qualities, of leadership qualities, beyond the managerial or management qualities that can be instilled in an individual of whatever age group, whether he or she is a college student or a business entrepreneur or a business successful venture capitalist, that leadership as a holistic quality is something that one can train in. So one important thing about leadership, of course, has to do with the sense of vision. That if you are an individual without a sense of vision, then you cannot guide any other individual. You cannot claim to lead any individual. You cannot claim to lead an enterprise, organization, society, and so on. So what this financial deficit actually alluded to, what it pointed to was a leadership deficit in the world. When you look around, we are gravely experiencing a leadership deficit, meaning lack of good leaders or lack of leaders who can stand, who embody the qualities of leadership that is desired for a good, healthy, sustainable planet or a good, healthy, sustainable world. And so, how to address this issue of leader deficit is by training or educating much better leaders who exemplify or embody some of these qualities, beginning with, of course, a sense of vision, beginning with a sense of what sort of world, what sort of society do we wish to create. The next thing is, in terms of leadership development, is as individuals, we have to understand or we have to recognize, meaning leaders as role models, that whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, we do present ourselves as role models or leaders in some capacity, meaning that it starts from a very small organic enterprise called a family, meaning whether you want it or not. You can claim that I don't want anyone to look at my behavior. I don't want anybody to learn from me. I don't want to be a role model for anybody. I am just an individual, a solitary blob in this existent planet. You can think of those things. You can believe of those things. But the fact is that our behavior is more contagious than we care to admit. So starting even in a small system such as family, moving to organization, society, the nation, world, and so on, that your behavior will always transpire other people to act in a certain manner. So of course, when one is in a leadership position, when one is in the position to be more contagious, to be more effective, then one has to be much more careful or much more observant of his or her behavior. Observant here implying that a constant reflection on what we are or what we are planning to become. Meaning, as human beings, oftentimes I give this example that we do live in a world of constant changes, of things changing around us a lot. New technologies, new versions of things. But as a human being, you see, some of the behavioral aspects that we have inculcated are thousands of years old. You see, meaning when you analyze human behavior or the human mind 2,500, 3,000 years ago, it is about at the same level. It's not that we are experiencing new emotions. We can simply express it in more sophisticated manner. So when you look at basic aspects of greed, deceit, joy, happiness, and so on, it's about the same. Meaning we haven't evolved in that capacity, in that category. So it is important, again, for a leader to recognize that as things are changing, am I changing myself towards a betterment? So the exercise that I often ask people of any age to do is, when you stand in front of the mirror every morning to dress, ask yourself, am I a better version of myself than I was yesterday or last week? Or am I a better version of myself than I was last month? Otherwise, when we fail to ask these sorts of questions of creating better versions of ourselves, our life becomes stagnated. Stagnated meaning that things around us will grow, things around us will change. We'll have wonderful quarterly reports, but within us, there is no growth, there is no development. There is a sense of stagnation that occurs. So when you prompt yourself regularly in a disciplined manner with this sort of question, then it counters that sense of stagnation. When it begins to counter that sense of stagnation, then you begin to focus more on aspects of, well, what does it mean to become a better version of myself? Meaning, how is it that I can grow to become a better human being? How is it that I can grow to become a better human being in various roles that I represent? Various roles meaning as a business leader, as a social leader, as a political leader, as a father, a mother, simple roles that we fill in our lives. That how is it that I best fulfill those roles? By virtue of focusing on this aspect of becoming better versions. See, otherwise, our focus is mostly, even in terms of education, is about acquiring new skill sets or modifying skill sets. So changing skill sets, but not changing our temperaments, not changing who we are as a person, creates this sense of compartmentalization. And we begin to live a very compartmentalized life. Compartmentalized life implying that we become a complacent individual, that we do things because we are part of the system. We do things because the system has evolved us in a certain manner. However, we seldom take a pause to think, to reflect, what is my contribution? And this is where philanthropy comes in. Charity, most of us are familiar with. It's the simple act of trying to help somebody or someone in need. And on a regular basis, we may practice some form of charity. Sometimes this charity or this act of charity is governed by impulses. Impulses such as, I'm in a good mood, I go outside, I see somebody suffering, and I don't like it, and I sympathize with the person, and I give the person some money or something to help. The person gives you a smile, and you feel content that you did something good. So that is a function of how you're feeling, and how the recipient is recognizing this act of generosity of yours. So charity, in that regard, is happening at a very small scale, microscopic level in some ways. Now, anything can go wrong in that. Anything can go wrong with that is you're not in a good mood. So you ignore the person and you walk away. Meaning that the impulse to help is absent. Or when you engage in the act of charity, the person forgets to say thank you, or the person is actually not happy, so he or she does not respond with a smile. And then this thought occurs to you in your mind, what an ungrateful individual. Meaning that here I was trying to help this individual, and this person doesn't even recognize what I am doing for this person. You heard that I? That I is louder than anything. So when the sense of charity is primarily governed by this voice of I, this I that is constantly looking for smiles, this I that is constantly looking for smiles in terms of that it will fill some void in me, that it will give me some meaning. That form of charity, or that act of charity, is impulsive. It's undisciplined for an untamed mind. And every time we act or we continue to engage in those, let me label it here, smaller acts of charity, not smaller merely in terms of scale, not smaller merely in terms of size, but smaller also in terms of intention, smaller also in terms of vision that determines that act. That in the long term, we do become kind people, but with a limited sense of kindness. We do exercise compassion, but with a limited sense of compassion, because all that this I, this self, is craving for is this immediate reward. It's content or happy with 10 smiles a day, but these 10 smiles may not be the genuine smiles. These are smiles like, darn it, that person could give me a $100 bill, but he gave me only 10. I'll have to come back again tomorrow. But it's a fake smile. It's a false smile that you give to that person. But the person is not able to see that. The person simply says, oh, I made that person happy with my $10. And that feeds this ego contentment in that individual. So how is charity distinct from philanthropy? So philanthropy, as most of you may be aware, that when you look at the Greek etymology of the word philanthropy, it's a conjugation of two terms. You see, philos, love, and anthropos, as in human or humanity. So what is philanthropy? Philanthropy is the love of humanity. Very distinct from a simple act of charity. Meaning, when you introduce philanthropy, it implies love as a discipline. It's not an impulsive sort of love. It's not that an impulsive act of kindness, but it is a determined act of kindness. It's an act of kindness, an act of compassion that you actually reflect on, that you actually think about, that actually draw up a vision for, that I have this vision for humanity. I love humanity. I want humanity to grow as I wish to grow. Then what happens is that your vision, your view of the world, your vision or view of who's going to be the recipient, who's going to be the beneficiary of your resources, it transforms itself. Now you're thinking big. See, now you're thinking of the long-term impact of your actions. And then the moment you think of an act for the love of humanity, that immediately overrides this I, this ego, this small thing that was simply being content with little smiles, little acts of gratefulness. Now, this I doesn't care about that. It cares about bringing smile to people's face, but it is not deriving a sense of contentment from how many people are happy. It looks at it, and it is happy and joyous with it, but it is not simply doing that act for that purpose, that I'm going to do this to put a smile on that person's face. But now the vision is much larger. Why? It is emerging from this sense of the love for humanity. So philanthropy is about leadership. Meaning, again, as I mentioned earlier, that leadership is about vision. You see, this is the same thing, when Rockefellers. So Rockefeller used to go through these similar acts of motion. You see, he'll be walking from his office to home or from his home to his office, and people knew he was a wealthy individual, so there'll always be some people standing in front of his house, some knocking on the door, and asking for help, you see, asking, well, what can be done for something, and so on. And Rockefeller initially started with those kinds of activities. And then one day he came to the recognition that this is never going to end. This is never going to end, meaning the line in front of his house is never going to end. There'll always be people knocking on the door. But the act of charity that he was engaging in was very disorganized. Meaning, in the long term, he could not measure the impact. He cannot measure what kind of help he's providing, where his resources are going, and so on. So what Rockefeller decided at that point was to start one of the first Western, sort of in the modern day, philanthropic organization, the Rockefeller Foundation. It began with the simple thing that this act of kindness that I regularly engage in is very disorganized. It makes me happy, it makes me joyous, but it is very disorganized. And moreover, I cannot look at how it's benefiting the larger world. Now I make this shift to creating a philanthropic endeavor, to engaging in a philanthropic organization. And there you begin to see the long-term impact of things happening. So philanthropy should and always remain grounded in this idea for the love of humanity. You will not be able to counter, meaning there are a lot of philanthropic organizations these days, and all of them do good things. Some claim to do good things. Some have very good websites, but when you go to the field side, you're puzzled beyond imagination. So vision is very important. And part of the vision, meaning what guides you, what propels you towards doing good, is very important. What propels you towards doing good, meaning the sense of love for humanity, is again something that you can train yourself to do. You see, again, it's just like any other form of love that we experience. They're impulsive, and then there are disciplined forms of love. And we know that impulsive is short-term. Discipline is long-term, sustainable. And it is not merely sustainable in terms of sustainability of the organization or the venture or the enterprise, but it is also sustainable in terms of sustainability of motivation. You see, how many times is it that when we engage in a kind act and we don't see a result, or when we have a bad experience, then the motivation goes away. We say, oh, to hell with the world. You see, it'll find its way of doing things. meaning a sense of fatigue. In the US, we often use this term called compassion fatigue. When you get drained out, when you get burnt out of practicing compassion, when you get burnt out by being kind. That's an oxymoron. Meaning compassion is something that should rejuvenate you. Kindness is something that should always make you this fresh, warm, lightened up individual. It should not make you fatigued. And this is the distinction, that the sustainability of motivation, that it's not merely about sustainability of things around you, but also, can you sustain your sense of kindness? Can you sustain your sense of compassion? Can you sustain your sense and ability to do good without getting fatigued, without having this sense of burnout? So this, again, is part of this aspect of leadership. That a leader, as an individual, has to often recognize what are the ways, what are the methods or techniques through which he or she can sustain certain core qualities, certain core values of what he or she is about as a leader. So often, philanthropy is, again, something that cannot be simply thought of in the vacuum. You have to look at the sustainable part or the sustainable aspect of philanthropy. One aspect of how to sustain this motivation, has to do with also how we view ourselves. So oftentimes, in the modern day, we confuse the understanding of net worth and self-worth. Net worth and self-worth. As individuals, it has become quite common to portray our identity by how much asset we have. Meaning, what we own, what we possess, what my net worth is. And that's how society tends to recognize what our net worth is. Self-worth is what you reflect on when you sit on a chair looking at the sky. When you don't have to wear a facade, a mask, in a room full of people looking at you. That's when you go deep down inside and you look at this notion of self-worth. And there is no correlation between the two, implying that your net worth could be beyond what anybody can imagine. And your self-worth could be zero. So when we speak of sustainability of motivation, when we speak of becoming better versions of ourselves, when we speak of what drives this vision for the love of humanity, what prompts this vision to create a better world, that emerges from self-worth. Net worth simply gives you the ability to make it happen. It gives you the ability to put it into practice. But it is self-worth. It is how you view yourself that gives you the broader vision to create a better world, to create a better humanity. So I often advise people that one should not confuse these two aspects of net worth and self-worth. And one good way to look at self-worth is, again, to do this exercise. And this, when I suggest this exercise, it's not to scare you, not to fear, make you fearful. But it is an exercise that, whether you're religious or not, you will need. You see, it's an exercise of writing your own obituary. You know what obituary is, right? So generally, obituary is, all the lies that your friends write about you when you have gone, to remember you by for the first week after you're gone, in some tradition for 50 days or so. And then people forget about you. Then your net worth is discussed for another year or so. And perhaps your kids will fight over your net worth, your friends, your employees, and all the charm of it dissipates. So here, when you write obituary, meaning this is a unique opportunity to write your own obituary. Why have a bunch of liars write an obituary for you? You see, Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, he speaks of various categories of friends. You see, he speaks of, friends with purpose, as in business friends, friends that entertain you, and, of course, friends of value. And he says, friends, business friends, they are there for you, but it is a friendship that is based on a barter system, meaning you give something and I give something. And that's how you sustain that friendship, meaning the core of how that relationship is sustained. Friends of entertainment is based on similar principle. You entertain me, I entertain you, and, you see, as long as we both feel entertained in each other's company, we continue the friendship. Friends of value is what is referred to as friends of virtuosity, virtuous friends. Meaning, these are individuals that you cultivate deeper relationship with. These are people who will be there for you in good times and bad times. But moreover, they are the people that you can genuinely rely on for the sense of advice. And getting advice to be a visionary is very important. Otherwise, we cannot envision everything by ourselves. We need good advisors. We need trusted friends. And the other reason we need trusted friends is also because we are creatures of habit. We become what we surround ourselves with. See? And if you surround yourself with good, virtuous friends, see, chances are that you will influence them in that manner, and they will continue to influence you. So anyway, that was a detract. So coming back to this idea of writing an obituary. So you write an obituary. An obituary, try not to fill up a whole sheet of newspaper, although we tend to do that. But what it gives you is certain insights into, well, what did you do in your life thus far? And it also gives you an insight of, well, planning for what you want to do next 20 years in your life. Seldom does an obituary mention that, oh, he ran so many companies or he sold so many companies. Most obituaries do mention the contribution, the impact that this individual made to society, to the world. Then, moving from obituary after 2 weeks of exercise, you engage in writing an epitaph. You know what an epitaph is? The epitaph is, the Christian tradition is more familiar with this, but again, you don't have to be religious to do this exercise, because whether we are religious or not, the day is going to come. It's not going to help in that. Epitaph is basically it tells your name and it says what year you were born, what year you passed away. And then it tells you in 10 words or less what kind of person you were. You see, meaning an epitaph is a more economical version of an obituary. You can't be too wordy in an epitaph. It's expensive to be wordy in an epitaph. So now, here, what you have to do is you have to describe yourself. You have to describe who you are as a person, what you stood for, how you related to the world, what inspired you, what kind of inspiration you left behind for the world, in 10 words or less. Now, that, when you go through that exercise, that deepens your understanding of self-worth. Meaning, what are my real core values as an individual, as a leader, as a philanthropist? Meaning, what do I really wish to change? What do I really wish to do in my life so that people see me beyond the lenses of business friends and friends of entertainment, but beyond that? That's where the impact is. So oftentimes when we confuse net worth and self-worth, it's a disservice to our own growth. It's a disservice to ourselves. So when you look into that self-worth aspect, and then you again, from that self-worth notion, you go deeper into the sense of doing things for the love of humanity. Now, of course, there are any kinds of endeavors that you can be involved with, that you can engage yourself with. But it is again important to look at the long-term impact, look at the benefit of what your involvement is going to yield, what your involvement is going to bring about. Why? Because philanthropy, see, in addition to wealth creation, it is about value creation. So value creation, meaning that philanthropy is not putting your resources into nothingness, but it is to see the return of putting your resources in different manners. And so besides wealth creation in terms of what monetary value you can assign to the returns. Looking at the value creation aspect, meaning what else does it do? Value creation here implies how many people it helped educate, how many people it helped become healthy, how many people it helped have a sense of livelihood, but not just from an economic point of view, but looking also from this creation of new value system, creation of new value in terms of the well-being of humanity. Because love of humanity should translate into well-being of humanity. You care genuinely for the well-being of humanity. So you should study. You should get advice on what is it that you wish to invest this in terms of value creation. Now, most of you will be busy, so you won't be involved with day-to-day operations of any philanthropic organization. But you should make philanthropic organizations accountable. You should make them accountable to what it is you're doing. Where is these resources going? Because we are living in a world of diminishing resources. Diminishing resources, meaning today we are 7 billion. In a few years, we'll be 9 billion human beings on this planet. There are resources, but they're limited resources. So again, the issue is, how do you maximize the impact and the benefit of these limited resources? So that again, you see, when you do charity, you're not thinking of this. But when you do philanthropy, you must take this into account, which is how these limited resources will multiply such that it helps the next few generations, such that it helps the next few generations in their own educational endeavors, in their own professional endeavors, and creating a sustained society, or continuing to create a sustained society. So these are, again, aspects of philanthropy that one should reflect on. So I'm going to probably just take a pause here, and then we can engage in some questions. I do want to end with a short anecdote, and which is a story that I myself, meaning it happened to me. And this was when about 9 years old. I was in a small village in India at the age of 9. And one day I was just, as a kid, strolling around. And I used to love striking conversations with older people. So there was this older gentleman sitting on the roadside planting trees. So I struck a conversation with him. So I said, Baba, as an elderly person. So, Baba, what are you planting? He said, well, I'm planting a mango tree. So then I got more curious, and I said, well, it's not your property. So he said, no, it's common property. It's on the roadside. So then I said, I asked him what goes into growing a mango tree, and he said, well, all the right conditions, sunlight, and tending to the tree, water, and so on. So then I asked him, Baba, how old are you? And he said, 93. So I said, my 9-year-old mind doing some calculations at that time. So I said, now, how many years will it take before this tree gives some fruit? And he said, well, it could be 7 years, it could be 5 years. It depends all on the condition. So immediately, of course, I jumped to the conclusion. I said, Baba, well, you won't be here. And I still remember that old man, illiterate, smiled, and he had this one tooth hanging here. He smiled at me, and when I said, Baba, but you won't be here, and he smiled back and he said, but you will be. That's what philanthropy is about. You plan things, not for yourself, but for the next 7 generations.